and Democrats are able to avoid the issue in the election of 48 for the sake of party unity and electing a president. The Democrats, Jason, do it by nominating Lewis Cass of Michigan and clinging to popular sovereignty. Now that's interesting, and I know you don't like this, Nicoletta, because we're going to go back up in history again. It's interesting that what unifies the Democrats in 48 is popular sovereignty. What unifies the Democrats in 52 is popular sovereignty. What unifies the Democrats in 56 is popular sovereignty. What divides the Democrats in 60 is popular sovereignty, if you think about it. I mean, in 60, basically the Dred Scott decision said that popular sovereignty was unconstitutional. The Southerners wanted to celebrate that. The Western and Northern Democrats wanted to cling to it. And when Douglas, I mean, we talked about this today, when Douglas, said, okay, I still support popular sovereignty, they had done it in 48 with Cass, they had done it in 52 with Pierce, they had done it in 56 with Buchanan, and at 2 or 3 of those elections they had been successful, right? They wanted to do it again. Douglas wanted to do it again in 60. But he could no longer, in the light of the Dred Scott decision and the Freeport Doctrine, do it. And so when they lost popular sovereignty to unify the party, they divide and they lose the election of 60. Now I know, you see how that's stretching out. That makes more sense to you now, does it not? It makes more sense, Christian, it makes more sense to you. Of course it makes more sense to you. But back to the election of 48. In 48, the Whigs are able to circumvent the issue of the Wilmot Proviso and the spread of slavery by nominating Zachary Taylor. And Taylor just doesn't have a position. But he's a Southern slaveholder, and so he attracts enough Southern votes to get himself elected to the presidency. What's interesting about Taylor, and there's questions on the test about this, is when it all is said and done, Taylor does not support the Compromise of 1850 that's going to resolve the issue of slavery spreading into the territories. Right? He doesn't support it. And Taylor's lack of support for the compromise almost is enough to kill it, along with some pretty heated sort of rhetoric on both sides. I mean,
Mr. Houlihan, please call 5741. Mr. Houlihan, 5741.
Certainly there'll be questions. Please give me your attention. Certainly there'll be questions on the test about the elements of the Compromise of 1850. California entering, popular sovereignty, the thing that the North liked the least, the Fugitive Slave Act, the issue of slavery in Washington, D.C., so you should be familiar with those things. And there will certainly be questions on the test about the debate. Nicole, that's when it got good. Remember when we were talking about Clay and his last and his finest hour, in supporting, the Compromise of 1850. Where was Webster, incidentally, in this? Did he support or oppose the Compromise? Does anyone besides myself and Kelly remember? Oh, go ahead, Gongol. He supported the Compromise. What was the name of that speech that he delivered? It was on a particular date, considered to be one of what? Yes. The 7th of March speech. He supports the Compromise of 1850. His constituency is upset about that because the Compromise of 1850 included this Fugitive Slave Act that many Northerners resented. How about Calhoun? Did he support or oppose the Compromise of 1850? Anyone besides Mabe and myself? Yes, Mabe.
He was opposed to it?
He was. You're back on the board, Mabe. He was opposed to it. How about William Seward? What was he? What was his position on the Compromise of 1850? Melissa? Opposed it. Why did he oppose it? He becomes known for this.
He had a more extreme northern position.
And he said there was a higher law than the Constitution. So he became known as Higher Law Stewart. Now, I'm going to do it one more time, Nicolette. I know you get mad. I'm going to do it one more time. Remember today when we talked about Seward being bypassed for the Republican nomination? It was that higher law speech that alienated him from the Southerners that may have cost him the nomination for the presidency from the Republican Party because he was considered to be too inflammatory.
Poor guy.
Yes. So Seward opposes it. How does Douglas eventually get the compromise through? What does he do? Go ahead, dear Nicoletta. Oh, Taylor dies. That helps. That helps. Unfortunately. Go ahead, Jason. I'm so happy you're participating. Go ahead.
He breaks it up into many bills.
Yes. Taylor dies. Fillmore takes over. Douglas takes over the fight, breaks the compromise into 5 parts, builds a coalition for all 5 parts, and gets it passed through. When it passes through, what we eventually discovered was that no one really voted for it. Nobody really voted for all 5 parts. Just a few people. No one really compromised. Now, and remember this, we said when the compromise was said and done, what the hope was that this would unify the country. But in some ways, it divided it even further. And one way was the Fugitive Slave Act. Who was Harriet Tubman? Who was Harriet Tubman? Does anybody, go ahead, Nicoletta.
She ran the Underground Railroad.
Well, we're not going to say she ran the Underground Railroad. We're going to say that she was probably the most famous conductor on the Underground Railroad. Now, the Underground Railroad, Thomas, what is he doing to you? That's healthy. Yes, Tubman was one of the people who went to the South, helped escaped slaves to escape, helped to transport them through a series of safe houses into the North and eventually, to Canada. And so she has become famous, or in some people's minds, infamous for her work with the Underground Railroad. And remember, we talked about the Underground Railroad as being part of the reason that Southerners wanted a strict new fugitive slave law. But remember, the strict new fugitive slave law that we talked about in great depth and in great detail only worked to make Northerners more committed to opposing the extension of slavery into the territories. Now, in addition to a strict new fugitive slave law, something else that caused Northerners to believe that, or to feel more strongly, was the publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin. And Uncle Tom's Cabin was written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. And remember, that book highlighted the immorality of slavery, and in particular, the effect that slavery had on families, which was something that Northerners, which resonated in the North. And so this sets the stage for the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Now, who was instrumental? Who, ironically, was instrumental in promoting the Kansas-Nebraska Act? Ironically, this person was instrumental. I mean, this person was instrumental. It was his act. Yes. Stephen A. Douglas. Now, the reason that was ironic, Palemechko, was this: that Douglas, after the Compromise of 1850, Douglas was the one that said, okay, let's just not talk about this anymore. Let's just set it aside. In the election of 52, remember both candidates, both Pierce and Winfield Scott were the candidates for the presidency, say, okay, we support the compromise. Okay, let's not. And so then in 54, Douglas supports legislation that explicitly negates the Missouri Compromise and resurrects the issue of the extension of slavery, despite his desire to suppress it. What was at issue? Why does Douglas want this? Oh, I'm so happy, Jason. Go ahead.
He wanted the Transcontinental Railroad to start in his hometown.
So, Christian, what he's saying is that what was at issue was building a transcontinental railroad, which Douglas wanted to at least somehow be in Illinois, maybe beginning in Chicago. And in order to do this, territory that had been acquired as a result of the Louisiana Purchase would have to be organized. Now, under the Missouri Compromise, what year? Courtney, it goes back a long